Hello and welcome to my Modern Parenting Guide. This is a guide that is updated for the grand concert scenario as well as independent training. This is going to be an all-encompassing guide that takes you from 0 to 100 in terms of parenting information and strategies. This guide is geared towards both newer players who need a little bit of help to understand exactly how different sparks work, as well as more experienced players who are looking into how to maximize independent training and other tools now available. As a quick disclaimer, a lot of stats that are presented in this video are not 100% accurate. This is because there are not exact formulas publicized from Cygames, and so a lot of the statistics and information that we as a player base have are a result of large-scale data sampling. This means that different places running different statistical analysis might come up with slightly different numbers. However, the numbers are all very similar, and so you can use a lot of these as a rule of thumb without having to get into the nitty-gritties of exactly what is working. As a quick overview on what a spark is, after every Uma's career, she will randomly roll various attributes based off of her own career and affinities. These attributes will be used and passed down to the next Uma via inspirations. So when I am talking about sparks, I am talking about this page right here. Blue sparks will increase your child Uma's raw stats, pink sparks can increase your child Uma's aptitudes, and white sparks can give skills or stats in the event of a G1 race spark to your child Uma in the 2 inheritance events during the career. You will immediately see the benefit of blue and pink sparks when beginning a career because they will increase your Uma's aptitudes and stats. However, it's important to note that you cannot increase an Uma's aptitudes to S at the beginning of the career. You have to spark it in an inspiration event. For blue sparks, at the end of a career, the blue spark is going to randomly take from one of your 5 stats. This means that each stat has a 20% chance of rolling that stat as a blue spark. After the stat is selected, it will then look at the value of the stat. If the stat is over 600, you will have a higher chance of getting a 2 or 3 star blue spark, and if it's over 1100, that chance increases further. So if you are trying to target specific stats such as stamina, it is important to raise that stat over your various thresholds. For pink sparks can spark from anything your Uma has an A or higher aptitude in. So in this first example, you can see that my Uma has a turf A, front A, medium A, and long A. This means that she has a 25% chance of getting any of these aptitudes as her pink spark. If I use a pink spark from a parent to increase another one of her aptitudes to A, she now has turf A, mile A, medium A, long A, and front A, and she only has a 20% chance of getting any A affinity to spark. So because of this, you want to be very careful when you're selecting your parent so that you don't increase unwanted aptitudes to A. For example, if I did introduce a Pace Chaser pink spark into this legacy, it would mean that she would have a harder time sparking turf or medium. At the end of your career, every normal skill that you get and every G1 race that you win has about a 20% chance of generating a white spark. If it is a double circle skill such as medium corners or right-handed, that spark will have a 25% chance rather than a 20% chance. A gold version of the skill, such as taking the lead, has about a 40% chance of generating the white version of that skill, which is early lead. It is very crucial to note here that you actually increase your chances of having a white spark if your parents or grandparents in the legacy also have that white spark. So for example, if I have a parent that I am trying to get a groundwork spark on, I have a slightly higher chance to have a groundwork spark on her if her legacy also had a groundwork spark. This is true for as many times as that white spark shows up in the legacy, so I can increase my chances of sparking groundwork from about a 20% chance to a 35% chance if every Uma in her legacy has it. Another thing to note here is that the chances of these sparks being higher quality, such as 2 or 3 stars, will increase to 70 and 10% respectively if the Umamusume is at least an SS rank. This makes getting SS rank very crucial for the quality of our parent sparks. So now when we put all of this together, we can come up with a list of goals for our parent farming. The first priority we have is a 600 or 1100 in our stats for our blue spark chances. The next priority we have is that we want to make as few undesirable A aptitudes as possible to increase the chances of us getting a good pink spark. Then we want to have good skills for our aces. Ideally, these will be skills that occur multiple times in the legacy, which means that we'll want to run cards or legacies that heavily feature these skills so that we can get them on our parents and hopefully try to spark them. The last thing here is that we do want to have high affinity for maximum inheritance chances. So now let's talk a little bit about affinity. The TLDR is that the higher affinity you have, the better, more consistent inherits you will get. So if you have more skill sparks, you'll have more skills you can buy. If you have more pink sparks, you have a better chance of getting those aptitudes to S, which is better performances, basically for free. More blue sparks means that you will have more stats for free, and then more race sparks means that you'll get greens and more free stats. So the long and short of this is that parenting is the the ultimate endgame when it comes to improving an ace. And I would go so far as to say that high affinity parents are even more crucial now than they have ever been. Because Grand Consort is such a RNG scenario, which means that we are closing out of our careers more often, we want more consistent access to pinks and high quality skills. As a thought experiment, if we are dooring 2 out of the 3 Grand Consort runs in junior year and we only get a desirable inspiration in 1 out of every 6 runs, then only 1 out of 18 of the runs that we start are even viable in the first place. This is not even counting stats, rainbows, chains finishing, or any other qualifier that we need to have a good ace. So because of this, we want to have a very high consistency in our inspirations, which means that high affinity is very, very important. Now, how do we get high affinity? Well, we G1 max. G1s now count for 3 points of affinity each, as opposed to previously when it only counted for 1 alongside G2s and G3s. Now, G2s and G3s no longer count at all for affinity. This system rewards lineages that win in the exact same G1s, and we can min-max this to catapult our affinity, which increases our inheritance chances. This is how we on Global start to get those fabled JP inheritances. So what does G1 maxing really mean? It means that we're running as many matching G1s in the Legacy as humanly possible. This means that we do want to run G1s that are not necessarily in line with our Uma's natural affinities. It's generally easier to fit in dirt races as a generic add-on G1s into any possible legacy than it is to fit other niches like sprints. Fitting in more dirt races also gives us access to a lot more G1s. Now, crafting legacies that can run dirt can seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's really not that complicated. Basically, you're going to take a couple of Umas that already have dirt pinks and make more Umas with dirt pinks. With all of these dirt pinks here, we are going to go ahead and start working on our grandparents. Our grandparents will have 10 dirt sparks at least in the legacy to get them from dirt G, which is the worst possible dirt aptitude, to dirt C, which is the point where they can start winning dirt races reliably. So our grandparents here have Dirt C and can run all Dirt G1s. This means that we then use another grandparent that hopefully has done the exact same thing by using Dirt parents here, and then we have 4 Dirt grandparents in this parent's legacy. This means that this parent also has Dirt C. So because 1, 2, 3, 4 of their grandparents have dirt, and all of these sparks will hopefully total to about 10 or more dirt sparks. So this parent right here also has Dirt C and can run all of the matching dirt races as their parents did. Now when we get to actually making the ace here, all of the dirt sparks have actually fallen off. Because these are Dirt C, these parents cannot spark dirt. We're trying to spark distance or even turf if it's a turf race on them. And that means that our ace here will not have any kind of dirts in their legacy that might affect their inspiration. You don't want to inherit like a pink that has no viability in the CM, so we are looking at a tree here that benefits from all of the legacies running dirts without having to make the ace risk inheriting a dirt spark, because all of the dirt sparks are on our great-grandparents or even our great-great-grandparents. Now here's the G1 schedule that I typically use. On independent training, you are going to run all of these regardless of their aptitude. On manual, if you're running a track blazer scenario, you would run all of the races you have a D or better aptitude for, including surface aptitude. Now there's a couple points of contention here that can go either way. The first is this early December race. You can either run the Hanshin Juvenile Fillies or the Futurity Stakes. I have typically liked running the Juvenile Fillies myself because I have a lot of Umas that I like to use in my legacies that run it as a career race. However, I do think that the Futurity Stakes is a little bit more common to see, so you might want to swap to that. And if you'll notice here, something very important is that we are never running the same race twice. We are not running the Yasuda Keenan or the Queen Elizabeth Cup twice. We're not running the Tenno Autumn twice. This is because running races twice does nothing if you win the first time. So you would only want to even risk running the Queen Elizabeth Cup in your senior year if you already lost it in your classic year. This allows us to stack more races than we might otherwise would have and gives us more affinity. If you are looking to reduce the number of races that you're running for higher rating, you can skip the senior early November unless you lost the Queen Elizabeth in Classic year. This is mostly because the JVC Classic is not going to be very common in guest legacies, and it does take the slot of a lot of other G1 races on that day, so you may run into a lot of people that ran at different races. So if you really need to, you can skip this. Independent training does tend to win more races at lower aptitude, so you can use independent training if you are struggling to get strong dirt legacies onto your grandparents. Now you will still probably lose most of your dirt races if you're trying to independently train dirt races with the aptitude aptitude of G, but if your aptitude is F or D, you might have a slightly higher chance of winning in independent training. Now, I have seen a lot of people kind of struggling with indecision on whether or not to stick to the Tiara or the Crown races. Overall, I would say it's a 3-race difference, and so there will be some times where they won't line up, and that's okay. Umas who can't run long races would typically go the Tiara route, and Umas who can't run mile would typically go the Crown route, but I generally encourage people to try to run more universal legacies. If you're running a universal legacy, I would advise to try to run the Crown if at all possible. This is just because there are more Crown Umas in the game than Tiara Umas, and so it will be easier to get matching races for affinity. If you are a late surger main, you do have the issue of Dober needing to run Tiara versus Ryan needing to run Crown. So in this situation, you would either just accept a slightly lower affinity, or you would run Tiara, Ryan, or Crown Dober manually in Trackblazer so that you can line up a little bit easier. Now, for parenting scenarios, there is a lot of nuance here. Both Ura Finale and Unity Cup are generally only ran for the skills on great-grandparents and above. These are not really run for actual legacies. The reason for this is because it is much harder to get an SS Uma in Ura Finale or Unity Cup if you are hitting all of the races that you're trying to do for your affinity. However, there are a lot of very valuable skills in Ura Finale and Unity Cup that you can only get in these races. So because of that, a lot of people have started running the Ura Finale and Unity Cup to try and pick up these skills and inherit them later into their legacies. That's why I have here listed the Ura Finale line and the Unity Cup. This is typically where you would run your Ura Finale careers in your legacy and your Unity Cup careers in your legacy. Note that these legacies are also looking for pink dirt sparks. Now, when we get to Trackblazer versus Grand Concert, it's actually a little bit more nuanced. Trackblazer, I do think, is still the gold standard for parent farming. However, you do have to play it manually because it does not really work if you're doing independent training in Trackblazer. Trackblazer gives you access to a lot more skills via your rival races, and you can stack a little bit more affinity through Trackblazer because you're not limited by your Uma's career goals. Trackblazer allows you to clock races and make decisions manually based on whether or not you have lost previous races. Now, the cons is that Trackblazer does take a lot longer to run, and you do have to play it manually. You might also lose more races on Trackblazer if you're trying to run with a poor aptitude Uma, particularly in those mile races. In Grand Concert, we only want to use independent training for Grand Concert. This is because if we're trying to manually play our parents in Grand Concert, we might as well just do Trackblazer instead, because Trackblazer will give us more affinity and reward us more for racing more. The massive benefit to Grand Concert is that you can do all of this with independent training, which means that even though it's not going to be quite as high quality as Trackblazer, it's still very, very useful for getting a pure volume of parents. Now, independent training in Grand Concert will reward higher quality legacies on their own. You do get more benefit from the legacies that you already have in Grand Concert, so if you're starting from zero, it can be a little bit tricky to raise up a good legacy just through independent training in Grand Concert. Grand Concert will also give you ultimately fewer skills as well as less control over your stats and rating if you are independent training. But the advantage of this is that you can just auto run your parent runs, and that is a huge benefit to the entire community. So like I mentioned, we cannot get scenario-specific white skills from Ura Finale or Unity Cup if we are running in Trackblazer or Grand Concert, so the strategy is to run great-grandparents in those scenarios. Now, the goal for great-grandparents is to also get dirt pink sparks to benefit our grandparents and parents. As you can see here, this Smart Falcon did not get a very good blue spark, but that doesn't really matter because she is a great-grandparent, so this blue spark is not going to influence my later generations. However, she did get a very nice dirt spark as well as quite a few ignited and racing spirits, which are exclusive to the Ura and Unity scenario. This means that she can pass down these skills to her future generations, which will make her a very good great-great-grandparent. This is kind of what I would consider the ideal endpoint to one of those Ura or Unity racers, where you are getting dirt sparks and you are getting some skills that you want to pass down. Now, to expand on this, let's start talking about spark looping. If you remember, I said earlier that the white skills that you get in your legacies will increase your chances of sparking it on your new parent. This means that if I get more white skills on my grandparents and great-grandparents, I'll be able to spark them a little bit easier on my parents. So this is where we are at spark looping. Spark looping will start at the great-grandparent stage or higher, and we then use those as parents for our grandparent runs. This step will enable your grandparents to inherit more desirable skills from sparks and spark these skills more easily. We don't really care about blue sparks when we're looking at our great-grandparents. So you can see here that I used the same falcon as well as a borrow Ogre cap that also has a lot of those good Unity and Ura Finale skills in order to make this Fuji, who inherited a lot of those really nice skills. This Fuji I actually ran in Trackblazer, and so you can see that even though I ran her in Trackblazer, I was still able to both inherit and spark some of these racing spirit skills from my parents here. So now let's take a really quick sidebar to explain why plus sparks are not desirable. So you can get these plus sparks, or these white sparks that have a little plus sign next to them, by running in the scenario and hitting some kind of achievement during the scenario. Unfortunately, plus sparks and non-plus sparks act as two different sparks in Legacies in terms of the ability to generate a new spark. Plus sparks can only be obtained by running in that specific scenario, so you can only get Racing Spirit Plus in Ura Finale, for example. Because of this, the white spark generation chance for plus spark does not get buffed by the legacy outside of that scenario. This is because they cannot spark the plus version of the spark if they are run in Trackblazer or Grand Concert. As an example, let's imagine that I am using this Ogre as a grandparent. If my parent somehow does manage to inherit and learn all of the skills here, I can then go to where they will spark it. My parent will have a 22.5% chance of sparking Racing Spirit Speed because their parent, this Ogre Cap, also has the Racing Spirit Speed spark. But they will only have a 20% chance of sparking Ignited Spirit Stamina because this is a plus spark, which means that if I'm not running my parent in this Unity Cup, then they will not be able to spark this plus spark. In order to avoid sparking these plus skills, if you're running in Ura Finale, you just don't get Happy Meek to her max level, so you will stop dueling her at level 4. And then in the Unity Cup, you will not face the Greek team in Senior Summer. If you avoid both of those things, you will not spark plus sparks, and it doesn't really affect the rest of your spark chances, which makes for a slightly better legacy. If you are running independent training, the independent training will not avoid plus skills, and it will spark them. So let's talk about some tips and tricks, particularly for independent training. The great thing about independent training is that it makes making both sets of parents much easier now, and being able to make both sets of parents is a huge buff for your account. You get more control over your legacy affinity, and you are not borrow limited on your ace runs, which is really big for scenarios where you will be dooring a lot. This also enables stronger loops for skills that you deem to be crucial. Independent training does reward very well built legacies that have strong blue sparks and a lot of good white sparks. If you have better blue sparks, you will have an easier time hitting SS ranking in that independent training. And because a lot of independent training skill acquisition relies on inheritance, because you're not really finishing your card event chains, then having a lot of white sparks in your legacy can be really helpful. You can use your agendas to copy and paste the exact same G1 races on every single UMA. If you save an agenda with all of the G1s that you plan on using, you just paste it into every single independent training run that you do, and this lets all of your UMAs run the exact same races every single time. And finally, I do think that because independent training is so huge, we should always be independent training. We are really trying to produce a high volume of UMAs to try and hit sparks much easier. I've already seen a lot of benefits of independent training by looking up various parenting sites and trying to find good parents. A lot of really good parents now are made because of independent training, because you can just fire off 10, 15 runs a day if you wanted to, just to try and get decent sparks. I mean, I'm doing an independent training run right now as I'm recording this video. I definitely highly recommend you to just be doing independent training as often as possible. Whenever you're really not playing the game manually, you can just be setting up an independent training run and sending it off. Now, when I say that, I know that I'm going to get a lot of people saying, I don't know where to start. Doing parenting in Umamusume can be very overwhelming, especially if you're just starting out. So I am going to give you some advice on exactly where you can start and how to start. I don't necessarily think that this is a catch-all for every single account and every single possibility, but I do think that if you're lost, this is a good place to start on, just to find an anchor on your account. The first thing I'm going to say is that doing literally anything is better than being paralyzed by indecision and not doing anything. So even firing off just the most random independent training possible is going to be better than doing nothing. If you are a brand new player, if you are a player that has started in the last few months or so and you don't really have any core foundation on your account, first I would focus on getting a stamina legacy. Don't try to overcomplicate it. Just try to get stamina blues on your legacy so that you have a good foundation. This is how I started playing the game. So I'm going to give you some screenshots and step-by-step instructions of exactly what I did when I started. So I played the game normally until I got a 2-star stamina spark. I then borrowed someone's 3-star stamina spark, which was this McQueen here, to try and make a stamina parent. This was during CM2, which was a long track, but the fact remains that I was just able to get these stamina sparks to line up here. Using this stamina parent and borrowing this stamina parent, I did a lot of runs until I got a 3-star stamina spark for an 8-star stamina legacy. So this Top Gun here was a child of this McQueen and this Fukukitaru, and she was able to give me my first 8-star stamina legacy on my account. This is a pretty good stopping point because the difference between an 8-star and a 9-star stamina legacy is not that high, but I did do some more parent farming and I eventually got a 9-star stamina spark. Now this looks very basic, right? This does not look extremely impressive when we're comparing it to our current parent runs, but this parent carried my early account. I used this parent this many times. Just on my own account. I never put this up as my borrow. I literally just used this as a parent that many times on my account. That's how crucial this early stamina legacy was for me. So I do recommend, if you are starting from absolute zero, starting to create this stamina legacy, which will probably look a little bit better than mine did back in the day, because now we have more access to better parents overall and guest parents that can give you really good whites. But this is my general advice for if you're just starting out. So don't worry about looping, don't worry about complex legacies, just focus on getting something usable. Your usable parent threads back into your legacy and makes it stronger. Once you're starting to re-thread your parents back through your legacies, you can worry about more complicated things like skill targets, looping, and affinity maxing. And here is an example of this. This is your G+ starter Uma, and you are using a very cracked borrow with them to create this Uma. This Uma might be a bad parent, but you know what? They're better than the G+ starter Uma that you started with. When you're using this parent, you can then thread them back into the same legacy by using the parent again with that same cracked borrow to create an Uma that will still be a little bit better than your bad other parent. This ultimately is how we're winding up with strong legacies, by constantly improving and threading back into our legacies using very strong borrows. Now, why am I recommending something so simple as a stamina parent? In my opinion, building legacies takes a lot of time and patience, but PvP events and CMs are happening constantly. An early stamina parent can help you get through early game hurdles such as team trials building, or even just building Umas that have high stamina careers. This also serves as a foundation for your future legacies. Getting enough stamina is one of the biggest choke points that I see for newer players, and so focusing on this early stamina legacy I think is really going to help, especially now that we're in a career scenario that does not let you build stamina very easily. Now, if you have a stronger foundation of an account and you're still a little bit lost on where to start, you can either start in Ura Finale or use a borrow parent with a lot of Ura Finale skills. In this example, I started with my Smart Falcon in Ura Finale so that I could try to spark Dirt. I used one of my more useful parents, but not really a parent that had any Ura Finale or Unity skills because I didn't have one on my account. I then borrowed a parent with a lot of Unity skills, and I did runs on Smart Falcon in Ura Finale until I hit a Dirt Pink with Unity and Ura skills. This means that I now have access to this Smart Falcon on my account, as well as this legacy here that gives me a lot of flexibility when it comes to building more and more legacies. When you're creating parents, you're not just generating a parent on your account, you're also generating that grandparent. So when you're selecting borrow grandparents, it's a great way to thread other people's hard work and legacies back into your account. So now I will use this Falcon as a parent for a potential grandparent for my legacies because she has that Dirt Spark and pretty decent ignited and racing spirit skills. But oops, my attempts at making a grandparent failed, but this failure actually hit some really great sparks. So this Fuji Kiseki I ran in Trackblazer with that Smart Falcon parent, as well as another borrow parent that has a lot of those Ura Finale and Unity skills. This Fuji was a Trackblazer run that failed to get a good blue or pink, but she did get a lot of really nice white skills. This means that this Fuji is now another possible grandparent, and I can use this Falcon and my Fuji together to try to farm grandparents without using my borrows. This is a great way to take advantage of independent training after my borrows are gone. So now we move on to grandparents, and I will say that making generic or multi-purpose grandparents will reduce the time you spend on your legacies and give you a stronger start in every CM you use them in. I generally like to build multi-purpose generalist grandparents as opposed to specific grandparents for every CM, just because I don't have time to build purpose-built grandparents on all of my legacies for every CM. We just don't have that kind of time on global. So I do think that the more time you spend on grandparents, the more rewarded you will be in the future because you can use them in a lot of different scenarios. For grandparents, I've gathered a bunch of Umas here that have a lot of strong velocity uniques that they can pass down to an ace These are not skills that are a make or break, but they are skills that are all pretty nice to have depending on what you're trying to run. So I would recommend grabbing one of these, or if you have another Uma in mind that you wouldn't mind inheriting their unique, feel free to use that as well. These are just all solid velocity options that can work as a general purpose kind of grandparent. For grandparents, I do think that turf sparks are more valuable here because they're a little bit more universal. You can use a grandparent with really good turf sparks in multiple CMs, even if they are different distances. So hitting turf sparks on grandparents can be really nice. Good blues and whites here are also going to matter. You don't want to go ahead and accept like a 1-star blue and a 1-star pink and no whites, because these are going to be part of your ace's legacy. You can also use style sparks at this level of parenting for aptitude fixing at this stage. You don't want to put style sparks in your main parent if you're trying to get a pink inheritance onto your ace for that distance S. So you really want to put those style sparks in your grandparent line so that you can get your ace to the style that you want her to be in. For Fuji Kiseki, if I wanted to run her as a front runner, she has a front of C, which means that I need 4 front runner sparks on her. This is where I would start looking for front runner sparks if I'm looking to make a front runner Fuji Kiseki. The next step is where you want to put your acceleration unique Umas. Distance sparks here are going to be crucial into getting distance S on your ace, which means that you really want distance sparks on your parents. I do think that you can have kind of lower standards for your parents because they're not going to be used quite as often unless you roll like a really nice one that you're going to use like every single medium CM or something like that. But typically this is where you would want to put Umas such as Saiyan Sky, Mejiro Dober, Taiki Shuttle, really just depending on what kind of acceleration you want for the upcoming CM. Because these will change in a lot of CMs, I typically have a little bit lower standards for my parents than for my grandparents. Again, for your parents, you always want to make sure you're using the same G1 raised agenda that you did for both of your grandparents. When you are looking at what is an acceptable parent, this is kind of my analogy. Distance pink, crucial white skill is here, I have decent other white skills, and my blue is not a 1-star, I'm done. And on that topic, the endgame of parent farming is accepting what is good enough. You do have to eventually start working on aces, so you can't just parent farm up until the end of a CM. Typically, I don't accept 1-star blues or pinks, particularly on grandparents, but if I'm in a rush or if I'm running out of time, I'll use it on a parent. When I'm looking at my parents and I'm saying, oh, this is so bad, it missed something, I don't have something, I'm thinking to myself, can I supplement it? If I missed a skill, can I substitute that skill on a card or a borrow? If I missed a pink, can I use my borrow to make up for that pink? So you're just trying to figure out like how you can get all the pieces that you want, and parenting is a really big part of that. And then parenting is a process that we are repeating forever. We are constantly improving and iterating on legacies, and this is how we're getting really good aces. So if you're looking for something to do in the game, just start farming, because that is going to give you a lot of options that you can use forever in the future, especially if you get like a really nice hit. Again, with independent training, we are focusing on quantity over necessarily quality, and we are looking at putting out as many parent runs as we can to try to hit something really nice. So that is my new and updated parent guide. I hope that it was helpful. I hope that you learned something, and please let me know if you have any feedback or comments. I have included a lot of parenting resources in the description, and so if you are curious as to where I got some of my numbers, or if you are curious just to read up more about it, please feel free to check them out. There are a lot of really good resources out there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye bye.